Hello YouTube, hello world. My name is Tisha and you found my channel, Yal Ministries, which I share with my husband who also speaks. And hopefully you stumbled across this video today, maybe looking up some tags that have to do with hauntings or demonic warfare. And you've come to the right place, whatever your background, whatever your belief system is. If you are searching and you are going through something like this, if you are dealing with these problems, you've come to the right channel. And I hope that something I say today can help you understand what you're going through and how to get through it. I want to start off by sharing our personal story. My husband and I dealt with an extremely harrowing, dangerous, frightening, haunting, the likes of which you would see on a television movie for about 4 years, many years ago, around 2013, 2012. And I want to share that story with you today. And for that reason, I would like to say that if there are any children around or any younger people listening that might get scared easily, I would suggest that maybe they not be listening to this video. Parts of our story are very dark, very, very evil, what we lived through. But I'm here to tell you that we did live through it, and I wanted to share our story and also encourage you and help you in any way I can. This is our first video, so bear with me. I've got my notes here. I've got my Bible. We also want you to leave comments, and if there's anything you want me to talk more about, give us feedback. That would be great. We want to help you. We want to reach out to you. So I'm going to start by sharing our story. My husband, his name is Kevin, and I were married in 2011. And we were living in Idaho at the time, and we ended up coming back to Washington State, which is where we live. And we were in the market to buy a house. We had just found out we were pregnant, and around May of 2012, I was invited to my cousin's house for a Mother's Day barbecue. And he lived on a historic part of Spokane called the Spokane South Hill, in a very old, very little house. And I remember driving there that day. It was sunny, and we went the back way, not down the main road, kind of up the alleyway, which was dirt, and there were some big pine trees. And I remember thinking, this, it's in the city, but it feels kind of, out of the city. It feels outdoorsy. It's up on a hill, set away from the other houses. It's kind of private. I thought, what a cute place he has. And he had us sitting outside. I remember the tulips were in bloom. It was very bright, beautiful. And I had gone in once to this house to use the restroom. And I took a peek around, and I thought, oh, it's small, but it's cute. Needs a little updating, but, this is quaint. And subsequently, a few months later, my husband and I found out we were going to be having a baby, our first baby. We were excited, and we thought, okay, it's time, we need to buy a house. And so I called my cousin who lived in the house. He actually was a realtor, and I said, look, we need to buy a house. We don't have a lot of money. Our income is, what it is. I'm working, but I'm probably going to quit working when I deliver this baby. Can you find us a house maybe in like yours, your size, and maybe we could afford something like that? And he said, it just so happens that I'm planning on selling my house. Me and my roommate, we're going to sell this place. And long story short, we talked about it. The numbers, they worked. And I had felt drawn to that house for some reason from the day I walked in there. Even in the kitchen, I just felt like this feels like an old cottage. There's something about it. It's charming. I feel drawn to this place. And we bought it. We bought that house in October of 2013, and we moved in. Moving in, pretty uneventful. I don't have any recollection of anything happening right away. My mother is in ministry, and she has a good friend who happens to be about my age, and her good friend had married a man who was also entering the ministry. And I'd had them over to visit. I didn't know them very well. And the first thing that ever happened was right before they got up to leave, he said, I've been fasting for many, many, many days, and God gave me a dream last night, and I need to tell you this. This is going to sound strange, but I need to warn you that God showed me in a dream, and he said, do you have a basement? And I said, well, yeah. He's describing our basement, and he said, in my dream, I saw your baby sitting on the floor in front of the television right about here, and he's motioning and showing me, and he goes, you normally sit here, and your baby sits here. And I said, yeah, we do. And he didn't know this. I hardly know this guy. And he goes, well, down in your basement, God showed me that there was this thing, and it's ancient, and it is not human, and it is not of God, and it focuses on you and your baby, and it wants to harm you, and it's going to hurt you, and I would like you to get your house blessed and cleansed, and you need to know that this is there, and you need to take care of this. And I'm looking at him like, is he trying to say what I think he's trying to say? Because I was just so caught off guard. And so I said, what do you mean a thing that's ancient? I said, are you talking about like a demon? And he said, yes. And I asked him, well, why is it here? And he said, I don't want to acknowledge it and give, attention to this thing. I don't want to talk about it too much. Just please heed this warning. He said, all I can tell you is it was here before you moved in. It has nothing to do with you. This was not brought here by some kind of sin, fighting, pornography, even like a single murder. This was brought here by the shed of innocent blood and mass murder. It's on this land, and please, please, please just protect your family, get the house blessed, get somebody in here, talk to your pastor, whatever. So he leaves, and I remember just being stunned. I have had experiences as a child. I believe that I have been given a gift from God in the realm of the supernatural. I had seen some, I guess you would say, paranormal things, had some dreams growing up that came to pass. And I thought, I've been here for 6 or so months, and, even being pregnant, women get up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom several times at 3 a.m. I never sensed anything. I was never afraid. I never felt weird, wasn't afraid of the dark, nothing. So I was processing this warning thinking, okay, I'm going to put that on the back burner of my mind, but I don't know what to do with this. I hadn't had any experiences. Shortly after that warning, things started to happen. So the first things I recall were the nightmares. My husband, we'd been married for a year. I don't recall him having many nightmares. I don't remember him waking up in the middle of the night, but I remember I woke up one night from this terrible nightmare. The first thing I saw in this dream was what the Irish would call a banshee. It was long gray hair, drawn mouth, black eyes, and like this tattered robe, and it was floating in the corner of our bedroom, and it was screaming, "Why?" And I woke up and I thought, oh, that was weird, okay, weird dream, I'm gonna go back to bed, whatever. A few weeks later, I had another nightmare, and in this nightmare, I was in a bathroom stall, and some wolves had busted into the stall. They were trying to eat my son, my baby, and I woke up distressed, full on sweating, and I looked over to shake my husband and wake him and tell him I'd had this nightmare, and he's moaning in his sleep, like in fear. If you hear jingling, it's just my cat. I'm sorry, she's checking me out. But my husband is moaning in fear and thrashing, and I shake him awake, and before I get a chance to tell him what my dream was, he goes, I just had a dream that somebody, these animals are trying to kill our babies. At this point, I'm starting to think that this is a very strange coincidence, but I'm not willing to go back to that warning in my mind and accept that, because it was such a stretch for me. Things continued, little things, at first little things that you could easily dismiss. There were loud thumps on the front covered porch. And again, the house is set up way on a hill off the road. I would go to the front door. We did not have pets at this time. I would open the door, look around, get out, look under the porch, which had lattice around it. There'd be nothing there, no animals, no nothing. And I would be like, okay, that's weird. I would also hear scratching noises, particularly in the bedroom walls. And so we had an exterminator come out to check for mice. And I'd also noticed, we didn't go in the cellar often, but we did have some storage down there, and there were massive amounts of spider webs with black widows. And I had called the exterminator, and I remember he came out with webs all over this boomstick with this thing that he uses to catch the webs, saying that was the worst black widow infestation I've seen in a long time. And that's pertinent because once you get to where we are and you've studied demonology, that it's not uncommon to have infestations of bugs, flies, spiders, things of that nature. He did, however, say there was no trace of mice in the house. He looked up in the attic. My husband at one point crawled up in the attic because he kept telling me maybe it's a raccoon. But things were adding up quite quickly. The nightmares continued. They got more violent, and they started focusing on and targeting on our son. About this time, our son, it started about 6 months of age, would wake up daily from his naps screaming in absolute terror. Not the type of scream like I'm hungry, or the only words he knew, up until the age of like 1.5 were single words, and once he starts speaking, it would be mama or no, and he'd just be terrified. And I'd wake up and I'd come get him or get him from his nap. He'd be crying. And I thought this wasn't normal. But again, I'm just excusing these things. I put them in the back of my mind for the first several months of these things occurring. One specific dream, and this is kind of graphic, but we're talking about a serious thing. In this dream, I was taking a bath, and I could see an old man in a suit approaching the front door of the house, and he was knocking, and my husband went to the door to answer. And in this dream, I knew that this man was going to pretend to be a salesman, but that he had malicious intent on harming my child. And in my dream, my husband went to the door, opened it, my son went up to the front door. The guy's, given his fake spiel, whatever he's trying to sell, reaches, grabs my son, goes out to the middle of the road, grabs a baseball bat out of his car, and starts bludgeoning my son to death. And it was absolutely gory, and I'm screaming in my dream. And I wake up, and I'm realizing it's just a dream, and I'm reeling. We started having electronic disturbances, particularly our bedroom light would start dimming and going off. It was not a dimmer. My husband's a low voltage electrician. He's trained with my father. He replaced the entire fixture. It continued. The bedroom lamp on my side of the bed caught fire one day. I remember smelling smoke when I was in my kitchen. And I walked in and saw an orange glow, and the lampshade was singeing and smoking, and the bulb had exploded. Just strange things, but again, when you start to study these things, or if you're going through it, they may be very familiar to you. So about this time, I'm starting to think maybe there's something going on. And I'm talking to my husband, and I had quit work to stay home with our son. So I was a stay-at-home mom, home alone all day. Don't go out much. And I'm experiencing all these things. I'm starting to see things during the day. I'm starting to see things out of the corner of my eye. I'm starting to see shadows. My son's waking up screaming every day. And I'm starting to tell my husband, and he had no experience with these kinds of things. And at first he was polite and would just shrug it off. Until one evening he went to take the garbage out around the side of the house, and our garbage can was right next to the stairs that went to the cellar. It was about sunset. And he's from Virginia, so they have fireflies. And I remember hearing him go, "What the heck?" Because he left the back door open, and I'm in the living room, and I go, "What? What happened?" And he goes, "I just saw a firefly." I'm like, "Honey, we live in Washington. We don't have fireflies." He's like, "I know." And he just kind of shrugged it off and came back in. And even though I'd had things happen, I mean, it didn't seem harmful, or I was just like, oh, lots of weird stuff happens around here, whatever. And I didn't want to give too much thought to that warning I'd received from that man, because it just gave into fear, which we're going to be talking about more. He'd seen this glowing ball about this big, like a marble outside, glowing at twilight. My son's nightmares continued. The waking up screaming continued. I remember being on the phone with my aunt one day, and he woke up in the bedroom screaming bloody murder. And my aunt goes, "Oh my goodness, what's wrong with your son? What's wrong?" And I said, "Nothing, he's just waking up from his nap." And she's like, "What?" And I go, "He wakes up like this every day." And she goes, "That's not normal." And I go, "I had a feeling." And she goes, "You should probably get him checked." And I agreed. So I set him up for a doctor's appointment. I took him in. I explained this to the doctor, and the doctor diagnosed him with night terrors and gave me a printout, which I still have to this day, and said it's not uncommon for children to see shadows and try to describe to their parents with whatever verbiage that they can communicate at whatever age they are, these things that they see. And I left that thinking, no, that's not what's going on. And when I get to the end of my story, you'll be able to look back and say, yeah, but do night terrors beat kids up? Do night terrors beat you up? Do they cause items to move? Did they cause curtains to levitate? Because these are the things that happen further on. And I know now that this was not night terrors. So that was unhelpful, except for that my son was examined, and he was found to be completely healthy, mentally sound in every other way. I had decided that things at home were too scary, and there was a lot of stuff happening. My husband wasn't really believing me. I wasn't getting a lot of support. I was too uncomfortable to share this with the rest of my family or my church. So I decided I was going to put my son in daycare full time and go back to work, because then my son is out of the house. He's not scared. He's not being dreams tormented, screaming. I'm at work. I'm not experiencing this stuff. I'm not being frightened or having to try to talk to my husband about it. And they found a dead cat in our front yard, and the cat was frozen stiff, and its neck was broken at a 90-degree angle, literally like this, and it was missing an eye. And I remember thinking, this is strange. I thought cats always land on their feet. You know, it didn't look like it had been attacked by an animal or anything. And it was just kind of macabre. And we had to discard of that too. But it just, again, looking back, there was just constant darkness setting in, constant death, sickness was starting. My son started developing, we thought he'd gotten sick from daycare, you know, numerous times. He developed a lung issue where he couldn't breathe and he would cough until he was throwing up. And I'd taken him to the doctor numerous times. They said, this doesn't look like asthma. It doesn't look like a virus at this time. We don't know what's going on. He was hospitalized. We brought him to the ER 5 or 6 times. I was extremely worried about him during this time. So I ended up quitting my job and having to come back home because he kept getting sick and he needed me. And so here we are again, dealing with this sickness and back in the house. And things started to amp up. At this point, I'm starting to see actual entities with my actual physical eyes in the evening out of the corner of my eye. One night I saw just torso down, white set of see-through legs go running through the front window room behind me, down the hall and out the back door. The dreams are continuing. Now I'm having dreams of these demonic, evil polar bears breaking through the back door and coming into the house. I'm starting to realize that we've got a problem. This is paranormal. This is a haunting. What our friend had warned us about is coming to pass. I can't explain away all of these things. So I'm now starting to get books on hauntings, famous hauntings. Go to Amazon, real haunting stories. What can I learn? Where can I go? I'm starting to kind of share it with close people in my family, and they're loving, but they are kind of hesitant to believe that it is just as I say it is, because naturally it's wild to say, you know, I'm seeing this and we're hearing sounds and bangs and scratches. My son's waking up, crying, and these things are happening. My husband saw a ball of light. And I'm starting to reach out now, and starting to try, as I'm hoping that you found my video doing the same thing. You start reaching out, trying to understand what you're going through and who else has gone through something like this. During the 4 years of this haunting, I must have read 10 to 12 books on true hauntings. I watched about every episode of a paranormal show I could, just to try and figure out what's going on. How do I fix this? Where do I go for help? Who can I talk to? During this time, I did reach out to our pastor, and also a pastor that I used to personally serve under and do missions work with. And it was almost eerie in that separately, and they didn't know each other or know that I'd reached out to them individually. They both said, I don't know what to do. I've never heard of a child being harmed by a demon. And all you need to do is pray. And we had been praying. And their comment about my child being harmed by a demon was in reference to some of the scariest things that happened during this time. And it culminated in one night. I could feel the evil in the house building. And in one particular night, I felt a presence next to the bed, and I felt being pressed into the bed. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. I felt fear and dread, and I felt something go inside my chest and grab my neck and start to choke me, to the point where I could not breathe. I thought I might die. And in my mind, I'm crying out to Jesus, and I'm crying out that this thing leaves in the name of God, in the name of Jesus, go away, leave me alone. And I sit up and I shake my husband, and I'm hysterical, and I'm telling him what's going on. And I'm telling him, please, you know, please pray for me. And he's tired and he's irritated, and I tell him what happens, and he's like, okay, we pray. I go back to bed. About an hour later, it happens again, the same exact thing. The choking, the presence, being pressed to my bed. I shake him awake, and I'm crying, and I'm like, please pray, it's here, it won't leave. I don't know if I'm going to survive, it's choking me. And we pray again, and we're both exhausted. I mean, there's been a lot of nights, a lot of sleepless nights, with the noise interruptions, with the nightmares, the fear. Sometimes you just don't sleep. And so we go back to sleep. A couple hours later, somewhere around 3, 4 in the morning, we hear our son scream, just blood-curdling scream. Now, our bedroom shared a common wall with our son's bedroom, and this wall was very thin. We could hear him roll over at night. We could hear him breathing, you know, we could hear him coughing. It was very easy to hear in this room, and we didn't hear anything before the scream, just a scream. My husband jumps out of bed. He runs in there, picks him up out of his toddler bed. At this point, my son's about 1.5. He brings him in, and he's patting his back, comforting him. And I reach over, turn on a bedroom lamp, and I notice that my husband's white t-shirt is covered in blood. This area here, just blood. And I'm shocked, like, what's going on? I look at my son's face, and his lip is swollen and sticking out, and it's pouring blood, and he's got some small bruises here and on here. Almost look like fingerprint bruises. And I'm trying to make sense of this. And I said, did he fall out of bed? My husband said, no, he's sitting up in his toddler bed, still under his covers. And so I'm looking at this, and instantly I recognize that he has, you know, if he had fallen or if he'd rolled over and hit his face, there'd be 1 point of injury for one scream. He had a point of injury here, a point of injury here, and a point of injury here. That's 3 separate angles that would have to have happened, and we heard no scuffle, no bang. At this point, I recognize that whatever was attacking me probably attacked him and drew blood. He was bleeding. We had to, you know, clean up his face, calm him down, get him back to sleep. And at this point, I was ashamed of this for a long time, but I was so tired and so confused and so just haggard from this going on for so long. At this point, it had been years, a few years, that I had my husband put my son back in bed, in his room. In retrospect, I would have had him sleep with us or, you know, taken off for the night. But I put him back to bed, and sure enough, it was only an hour or so later, we heard him wake up screaming, no, no, no. And at that point, we did bring him back to sleep in our bed. My husband was wandering around the house, stomping, just yelling, I don't know what's going on, but there's something going on in this house, and I don't like it, and I don't like it at all. So, you know, this was serious. At this point, I started reaching out to paranormal teams because I wasn't getting help from the church. I reached out, majority of my family is Catholic. I reached out to a trusted priest, and coincidentally, he lived 2 blocks away and said he went on a daily walk past my house, but that he would not come to my house, that the Catholic Church, you need to go through, you know, therapy first for any childhood traumas you may have endured, to rule out any, you know, mental illness, emotional illness, things of that nature. And in our minds, I didn't have that kind of time. I didn't have time to set up appointments and pay a bunch of money we didn't have. We were really struggling at this time. And I know a lot of you might be thinking, I've heard this a lot in other hauntings, well, why didn't they just leave? I'd rather live in a cardboard box under a bridge than live in that house. We didn't have any family members that had the ability for us to live with them full time. We didn't have the money to go out and buy a house or stay in a hotel. And as much as I'd like to say, yeah, there were nights I'd rather live in a cardboard box than live there, when you have a child, you can't just go live on the street. I mean, logic says CPS will come and take your child, or there's other dangers, you know, especially downtown. I mean, it's a funny saying, but when you're living through it, and when you've studied some of these more famous hauntings that movies and books are based off of and mainstream media, you'll find often that they didn't flee when they wanted to. They couldn't, often financial reasons or an inability to sell their house, which was the same with us at that time. We did list our house for sale. It did not sell. So, in part of my attempt to figure out what was going on, I did reach out to our neighbors and asked them about the history of the house. They had mentioned that there was a girl who had lived there who had suffered severe burns over a majority of her body playing with candles on her birthday, and that they didn't know if she had survived the fire. And so I did some digging, and this is kind of a little bit of a rabbit trail. Maybe someday we'll write a book or get into more detail, but for the sake of time, I'll just say that I did find some newspaper articles on this, and she did survive the fire. I did find her mom's name, that her mom lived in the house, and I reached out to her on Facebook, and she reluctantly shared with me that while she lived through her incident with the fire, her father had gotten in some kind of an altercation with his best friend in the back of our house, and it had resulted in him being shot in the head, and he was brought into the house through the back door into the bathroom unconscious, and he did not survive. I don't know if that played into the haunting or not, but I just know that at that time I was reaching out to the library, trying to find what had caused this. I did reach out to some paranormal teams against some of my family and friends and church's advice. They were not comfortable with that aspect for reasons you will know if you are a church-going Christian. But I did, and I was very selective about who I had come in. I interviewed one team, and he had said he had worked for the FBI, and he was very anxious to get in and get some footage to catch some of this on film. And at this point, after reading books, I knew enough to know that when you acknowledge a demonic power and you give it attention and you try to catch it on film, it will show up and things will happen. But when that paranormal team leaves, then the family's stuck there with the aftermath. It just kind of like pokes the alligator in the cage or pokes the bear in the cage, gets it all riled up, and then they leave. I wasn't at all interested in getting footage of this. I didn't care about YouTube views. We didn't have a channel back then. I didn't care about people believing my story anymore. At this point, it had gotten to the point where this was about surviving and about, I wanted somebody that could help us get this thing out of the house, get rid of it or get us out. So I did not even want to do an investigation unless they had to prove to themselves that there was something there so that they could help us. So he did suggest that there was a lady that was, referred to as a psychic who had special gifts that could see things, and that she was in Oregon, and that he had worked with her personally in the FBI to solve missing persons cases and murder cases with children. And he described a case where she had seen a pair of children's underwear in the woods and described the scene, and that the police had gone out and had found them where she said they would be and ended up finding a child's body. And while the better part of me in my upbringing said, I know that I'm not going to be supported in consulting, somebody that refers to themselves as a psychic by my family or my church, at this point I am so desperate. At this point I'm thinking that this thing can hurt us. It made my dog sick. There was a dead cat in the yard. We're seeing things. We're being attacked at night. Our health is failing. My son is sick. At this point I'm like, I need anybody that can help me, anybody that knows about this. So I reached out to her and over the phone, and she did give me a report, if you will, of the home, and just confirmed that there was a lot of death in the house, that there was something evil there, that she saw an old man. I'd seen an old man in my dreams, that we were in danger and that I was gifted, and that was part of the reason we were targeted. And so I was like, okay, great. She told me what we already know, now what? Still didn't really help us get rid of the issue. So at this point, my family started to get involved a little bit and started to believe. They're seeing, it was my birthday shortly after my son was attacked. They saw the injuries on his face. They're like, what's going on? Was somebody in the house? I'm explaining this was in winter. We had plastic taped over his windows for insulation. My husband was with me in bed when I heard the scream. It was neither of us that did this to him. We don't think he could have done that to himself, beat himself in 3 different places on his face. So my mom started reaching out to some of her Christian friends who were prayer warriors to see if they would come to my house and just do like a house blessing, house cleansing, to pray this thing out of there. And I was all for it. So while she was arranging that, in the meantime, my mother-in-law had come to visit, and we had not shared this at all with my husband's parents because of their background and their beliefs and their faith and their religion. We didn't know how they would respond to us, and being in emotional turmoil, we didn't want any more negativity or any judgment. I mean, it's something that if you're going through this, you might understand. You feel ashamed of. You feel like you have to hide it for a long time until such point when you become so desperate for help that your fear of going out and getting help is less than your fear of staying there and enduring what you're enduring as it gets worse. So my mother-in-law had driven up from Idaho to stay with us for a while. She had, to my knowledge, knew nothing about what we were going through. And this, again, was in the winter time. And it was about 8:30 or 9 at night. And my husband and I decided we were going to go pick up dinner at the store just a few blocks up the South Hill and get a movie at Hastings before they all closed down. This is 2013. So we had gotten in our van, we left our son with my mother-in-law, and we took off. And we weren't gone too long, 30, 45 minutes, picked out a movie, got some food, and we came through the back door as we normally did, park by the garage, came through the back door. And I remember my husband walked into the living room to talk to my mother-in-law, and I was hanging my coat by the back door and we had a sheer lace curtain by the back door. And I remember that night, as I was hanging my coat over the hook, I saw a black shadow go by the back door, just whoosh, and at that same second the door went and the handle shook violently, and it caught me so off guard and was so loud, I yelped, I screamed. I was like, ah! And my husband came running in, he's like, is everything okay? And I was like, yeah, it's good, because I didn't want to make a scene about it in front of my mother-in-law. And he goes, well, you're not going to believe what my mom just told me. And I go, what? And he goes, come into the kitchen. And he goes, my mom just told me that she heard a car pull up in the back alley, which again, off the street, on a hill, no one's around us, it's a shared alley, my neighbors, it wasn't them, we're way back from the road, in the trees. She hears a car pull up, she hears a van door slide and lock, and she thought, oh good, they're home. And she walked up to the front door of our house and looked through a window. We had an oval, half oval window. And she said she saw Kevin, my husband, walk around the front porch and up the stairs. And she said, I looked right at him and he looked right at me, and it was Kevin. And I thought, oh good, they're home. And I opened the door and there was nothing there. And I was like, okay, what? Because this just took things to an entire new level in my mind. I'm knowing that she's telling me the truth. I know we've had a lot of crazy paranormal, evil, demonic stuff going on in our house. But at this point, I'm thinking a lot of things happen either in our dreams or when we don't see them, but now we're full on seeing stuff. And I go, but you know it wasn't Kevin because we were at the store. He was with me. She said, no, I know my son. I looked in his face. It was Kevin. And I go, but he wasn't home. And as I'm having this, this conversation with my mother-in-law, my husband, Kevin, standing behind me, and she glanced up to talk about, again, what she saw, and she pointed at this window, and she could see Kevin's reflection from standing behind her in the window, and she goes, yeah, come here and look. See how he looks right now, kind of transparent? He looked like that. He was kind of transparent when he was walking up. And I'm like, okay, wait, you said you saw him walk around the edge of the porch, but now you're saying you saw his reflection, so was this thing in the house? That's what I'm thinking. So she described, Kevin that she saw with a green t-shirt on, and Kevin was not wearing a green t-shirt. She said he didn't have a coat on. This is 9 o'clock at night, it's snowing. Kevin had a coat on, and well, I knew it wasn't Kevin because Kevin was with me. So I opened the door, and I went out, and I looked in the snow, and there were no footprints coming around the porch. So at that point, I knew, okay, now this entity, this demon, is taking the shape of my family and appearing to people that didn't even know we had anything going on. She said she didn't feel afraid, but she did acknowledge that she felt that this was a spiritual event and that it was not of God. It was just kind of strange that evening, very strange. So several days later, my son was in the living room watching a YouTube episode of Thomas the Train, and I was doing dishes, and I heard him start screaming, mommy, 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 and I come out, and he's pointing at the TV, he's crying, he's shaking, he's like pointing frantically like, mommy, and I'm like, okay, something terrified him, what, and I'm looking at the show, and I'm thinking, did Thomas crash? Is this like a bad episode? Is Thomas hurt? Or is this one of those YouTube shows where, some horrible people went in and cut in clips of something very inappropriate or scary, and I rewound it and I watched the whole thing, and it was a happy Thomas the Train episode. So now I'm starting to think, is this thing presenting itself in the television to my son? And we were having issues with our TV. It would flip on and off all the time, frustrate us. There's so many things that happen, and I would love to share them all with you. For the sake of time, I'm just going to hit, some of the last few big things that happened. And again, I can maybe do another video. Maybe someday we'll write a book. I don't really want the focus of this channel to be on the horror and the fear and the things that we experience, but I tell you because I want you to be able to relate if you're going through this. I want you to know that we're legit and I'm telling you the truth, and I want you to know that I'm not talking about we hear footsteps coming up the stairs and whispers for 4 years. No. This haunting was horrific.